I had worked night security at a small regional hospital for almost 3 years before this happened. It was the kind of hospital most people drove past without ever noticing. Two main buildings connected by a narrow glass hallway, a parking lot with maybe 100 spaces, and an emergency entrance that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet pavement. The hospital sat on the edge of town. Past the back fence, there was nothing but a stretch of trees and an old service road that eventually connected to the highway. I worked 12-hour shifts, usually from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights were boring. That was what I liked about the job. You learn the routine. You checked the emergency department, walked the main corridors, made sure doors were locked, responded when nurses called about a patient trying to leave or a family member getting too loud. Then you did it all again. I had a 2008 Chevrolet Impala that I parked in the employee lot every night. I carried a flashlight, a radio, a ring of keys, and a little notebook where I wrote down anything unusual. That was my whole life for a while. Work, home, sleep, work again. This happened in late November. The weather had already turned cold, but we hadn't had any snow yet. It was one of those damp, miserable nights where the temperature stayed just above freezing. The parking lot was wet, and the wind kept pushing dead leaves against the curbs. I remember arriving at 6:42 p.m. I was early. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the heater running, finishing a gas station coffee that had already gone lukewarm. At 6:51, I noticed something strange. There was a light on in the fourth-floor west wing. I knew that because I could see the windows from the parking lot. The problem was that the fourth floor had been closed for almost 2 months. Renovations. Nobody was supposed to be up there. I figured somebody had forgotten to shut off a light. It happened all the time, so I went inside. At 7:03, I clocked in. My supervisor, a guy named Martin, was finishing his shift. He was in his 50s and had worked security there longer than anyone. I mentioned the fourth floor light. He looked at me. "Which light?" "The west wing, room side." He stared at me for a second. Then he shook his head. "Probably maintenance." That was it. I didn't think about it again for another few hours. Around 10:30, I was sitting at the security desk near the emergency entrance when one of the nurses came in. Her name was Claire. She looked tired. She asked me if I had seen anyone walking around upstairs. I told her no. She hesitated. Then she said, "Never mind." I asked what she meant. She just smiled awkwardly. "Probably nothing." Then she walked away. That bothered me more than it should have. At 11:15, I made my first full patrol. The hospital was quiet. The emergency department had 3 patients. The second floor was almost empty. The third floor had 2 nurses working at the far end. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors opened at 11:28. The hallway was dark. The renovation crews had removed most of the ceiling panels so I could see pipes and wires above me. The air smelled different up there. Dust, old plaster, something damp. I walked about 20 feet. Then I heard a door close. Not slam, just a quiet click. I stopped. I looked down the hallway. Nothing. I raised my flashlight. The beam moved across empty rooms. "Maintenance?" I called. No answer. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard footsteps. Behind me. Slow. 1, 2, 3. I turned around. Nothing. The elevator doors were still open. I could see my own reflection in the metal. For some reason, I suddenly felt embarrassed, like I'd scared myself for no reason. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. I went back downstairs. At 12:04, I wrote in my notebook. 4th floor. Possible maintenance activity. No contact made. I didn't write about the footsteps. I didn't want to sound stupid. The next strange thing happened around 1:40 a.m. The radio on my belt crackled. Static. Then a voice. "Security to West Wing." I pressed the button. "This is security. Go ahead." Nothing. I waited. Then I heard breathing. Very faint. I looked at the radio. "Hello?" The static returned. Then the voice came again. "Room 417. The transmission ended. I immediately called Martin. He wasn't there anymore. So I called the nursing station. Claire answered. I asked if anyone had called security. "No." I told her about the radio. There was a long pause. Then she asked, "Did they say 417? "Yeah." Another pause. "That's weird." I asked why. She told me room 417 had been sealed off. Apparently, the renovation crew had discovered water damage behind one of the walls. The room had been locked for weeks. I asked if someone could be inside. She said no. Then she said something that I still remember. There's no reason anyone would be in there. I took the elevator back up. This time I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt nervous. The hallway was exactly as I'd left it. Dark, cold, silent. I walked toward room 417. The door was at the very end of the west wing. There was yellow construction tape across it. I stood there. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand. I reached for the handle. Locked. I tried my security key. It didn't work. I was about to turn around when I heard something from inside. A cough. I froze. It sounded like an older man. One short cough. Then silence. I stepped closer. Hello? Nothing. I knocked 3 times. No answer. I tried the handle again. Nothing. Then something moved on the other side of the door. I heard footsteps. Right up against it. I backed away. My radio suddenly crackled. I grabbed it. Security. Static. Then a voice. Please don't open the door. I nearly dropped the radio. The voice sounded like Claire. I immediately called the nursing station. The phone rang and rang. Nobody answered. I stood there in the dark corridor with the phone pressed against my ear, listening to it ring downstairs. Then I heard something behind me, a door opening. I turned. About 30 feet away, one of the unfinished patient rooms had opened. I hadn't heard anyone walk past me. The door was slowly moving, back and forth. I raised my flashlight. Hello? Nothing. I started walking toward it. Then the door slammed shut. I ran. I don't mean I walked quickly. I ran straight to the elevator. I hit the button. Nothing. The light above the elevator showed it was on the 2nd floor. I pressed the button again. Then I heard footsteps behind me, fast, coming down the hallway. I turned around. My flashlight beam bounced across the floor. Nothing, but the footsteps kept coming. I could hear shoes hitting the concrete. Closer, closer. Then the elevator opened. I jumped inside. The doors began closing. For half a second, I saw something at the end of the hallway. A person, standing completely still. I couldn't see their face. They were wearing what looked like dark blue hospital scrubs. The doors closed. I didn't wait. I hit the button for the 1st floor. When I reached the security desk, Claire was there. I was breathing hard. She looked at me. What's wrong? I asked her if she had just called me on the radio. She said no. I asked if she had been at the nursing station. She said yes, the entire time. I looked at the clock, 2:07 a.m. I told her everything. She didn't laugh. Instead, she walked over to the security monitor. We checked the cameras. The 4th floor hallway camera was still working. We rewound the footage. At 1:57 a.m., I appeared on the screen, walking toward room 417. At 1:59, I stopped. At 2, I suddenly ran toward the elevator. Claire stared at the screen. Wait. She rewound it. We watched again. I was alone. There was nobody behind me. No one came out of the rooms. Nothing moved. Then Claire pointed at the screen. What's that? I leaned closer. The camera showed the end of the hallway. Room 417 was visible. The door was closed, but there was something underneath it. A thin strip of light. The room appeared to be illuminated from inside. I looked at Claire. Was there supposed to be a light in there? She shook her head. No. We called the hospital administrator, then the police. 2 officers arrived around 2:40. They checked the 4th floor. Room 417 was still locked. They opened it. The room was empty. There was no furniture, no person, no light, just exposed pipes, unfinished walls, and a large plastic sheet covering the floor. One of the officers walked inside. Then he stopped. He pointed toward the wall. There were muddy footprints. They started near the window. They crossed the room and stopped directly beside the door. The footprints were fresh. That was the part that bothered me, because the window was sealed shut, and the only door was the one we had been standing in front of. The police searched the entire floor. Nobody was there. They checked the stairwell. Nothing. I finished my shift at 7 a.m. I drove home as the sun was coming up. I didn't sleep that morning. I kept thinking about the person I'd seen at the end of the hallway, the dark blue scrubs, the way they had been standing there, watching me. The hospital never found out who made the radio transmission. They checked the system and couldn't find a source. The recording wasn't saved. A few days later, room 417 was sealed permanently. I eventually quit that job. Not because of that night. At least, that's what I told myself. But I still think about it sometimes, especially one detail. The following spring, I ran into Claire at a grocery store. We hadn't spoken since I left the hospital. She asked me if I remembered that night. I said yes. Then she told me something I had never known. Room 417 had been empty for nearly 6 months before I ever started working there. But she said that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that, according to the hospital's old records, the room had been removed from the floor plan years earlier. There technically wasn't supposed to be a room 417 at all. I laughed when she told me. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. And to this day, I still don't know what I saw standing at the end of that hallway. But I know one thing. I never went back to that 4th floor, not even during the day. I had been living alone with my 6-year-old daughter for just over a year when this happened. Her name was Emily. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street outside town. Nothing fancy. 1 floor, a narrow driveway, a little backyard with a wooden fence that leaned slightly to the left. I had bought the house after my divorce because it was cheap enough for me to afford on my own. Most people would have called the neighborhood boring. I loved that about it. There was a gas station about half a mile away, a grocery store 10 minutes down the road, and a school bus stop at the end of our street. The closest neighbor was an older man named Mr. Wilson who lived across from us. He had a brown pickup truck and a habit of mowing his lawn every Saturday morning, even when the grass barely needed it. I worked at a dental office during the week. Emily went to school. Our routine was simple. Dinner around 6, homework at 7, bath at 8. Then I'd read her a story before putting her to bed. That particular night was a Tuesday in early October. It had been raining since the afternoon. Not heavy rain, just that steady, annoying kind that made everything outside look gray. By 9:30 p.m., Emily was asleep. I was sitting on the couch watching television with a blanket around my legs when I heard something outside. A car door. I muted the television. I waited. Nothing. A few seconds later, I heard an engine start. Then it drove away. I looked through the front window. The street was empty. I figured one of the neighbors had come home late. I unmuted the television. About 10 minutes later, I heard a knock. 3 knocks. Slow. Knock. 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 I sat up. It was 10:04 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked toward the front door but stopped before reaching it. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. The porch light was on. The rain was falling behind the empty porch. I waited. Then I heard footsteps. They moved away from the front door. I opened it. The porch was empty. I looked down the driveway. Nothing. I stepped outside. Cold rain hit my face. I checked the sidewalk. No one. I closed the door and locked it. I remember thinking it was probably a kid. Maybe someone had knocked as a joke. It wasn't uncommon in our neighborhood, but something about it bothered me. The next morning, I mentioned it to Mr. Wilson. He was getting his newspaper from the driveway. I asked him if he'd seen anyone around our house the previous night. He frowned. No. Then he asked why. I told him about the knocking. He looked toward my house. Then he looked back at me. 3 knocks? I laughed. Yeah. He didn't. Instead, he said, "You should keep your doors locked." I thought that was a strange response. I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. Just saying. Then he walked inside. I didn't think much about it until the following night. It happened again. 2:13 a.m. I woke up because I heard something downstairs. A soft scraping sound. I lay in bed listening. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. I reached for my phone. 2:13. I got out of bed. The hallway was dark. Emily's bedroom door was open. I could see her sleeping. I walked downstairs. The scraping stopped. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. The back door was locked. I checked the living room. Nothing. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. This time they came from the back door. I froze. The back of our house faced the woods. There was no porch, just a small concrete step and the backyard. I stood in the kitchen. I didn't move. 3 more knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I know that sounds stupid now, but at the time it was the first thing I saw. I walked toward the back door. The curtains were closed. I didn't want to look outside. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me already knew I wasn't going to like what I saw. I pulled the curtain back. The backyard was empty. The rain had stopped. The grass was wet. The motion light above the door was on, and near the fence I saw footprints. Bare footprints. They started at the fence. They crossed the wet grass. They came directly toward the back door. Then they stopped. I stared at them. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the door. The lock was still in place. I grabbed my phone and called the police. While I waited, I went upstairs and woke Emily. I told her to get dressed. She asked why. I told her we were going to stay with a friend. I didn't tell her about the footprints. I didn't want to scare her. The police arrived around 2:30. 2 officers checked the yard. They found the footprints. One of them crouched beside them. He said they were probably from an adult. They followed the trail toward the fence. The footprints stopped there. The officers searched the other side. Nothing. No car, no person, no fresh tracks. The officer asked me if I had enemies. I almost laughed. No. He asked if I had been having problems with anyone. Again, no. Then he asked me something that made my stomach tighten. Do you have a basement? I said no. He looked at the house. Attic? Yes. Mind if we check? I nodded. We went upstairs. The attic entrance was in the hallway ceiling. The officer pulled down the ladder. He climbed up. I waited below. A few seconds later, he came back down. Nothing. He told me to call if I saw anyone. I asked him what he thought had happened. He said somebody had probably been watching the house. That was all. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Emily. We stayed at my sister's house for 3 days. When I returned home, everything looked normal. No broken windows, no damage, nothing missing. I almost convinced myself it had been some random person. Then I found something. It was in Emily's room. A small object sitting on her windowsill. A pink plastic hair clip. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to her, but she had lost it at school weeks earlier. I asked her where she'd found it. She said she hadn't. I asked if she'd put it there. She said no. I looked at the window. It was locked. The screen was still attached. I didn't tell the police. I probably should have. Instead, I threw the hair clip away. Then I changed the locks. I installed cameras. I bought motion lights for the backyard. For a while, everything was normal. Then about 2 weeks later, it happened again. 2:13 a.m. 3 knocks. This time, I was awake. I had been sitting in the living room working on paperwork. I heard them from the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I looked at the camera monitor. The porch was empty. I checked the recording. Nothing. No one approached the door. No shadow. No movement. Just the 3 knocks. I called the police. They came. They checked outside. Nothing. One officer looked at the camera. He couldn't explain it. Then something happened that still makes my hands go cold when I think about it. While we were standing in the living room, my daughter's voice came from upstairs. Mom, I turned around. Emily? The officer looked at me. She's upstairs? I nodded. I started toward the staircase. Then I heard Emily again. Mom? This time her voice came from the hallway, but it didn't sound right. It was too quiet, almost like someone trying to imitate a child. I stopped. The officer put his hand out. Stay here. He walked upstairs. I followed. Emily's bedroom door was closed. The officer opened it. She was asleep, completely asleep. I stood there staring at her. Then she suddenly sat up. Her eyes were still closed. She whispered something. I leaned closer. What? She whispered again. I couldn't understand her. Then she said clearly, There's someone outside. The officer looked toward the window. I ran over. The curtains were closed. I pulled them apart. The backyard was dark. Nothing. Then I saw movement. Near the fence. Something was standing there. I couldn't tell if it was a person. It was too dark. The officer drew his weapon. He shouted, Police! Show me your hands! The figure moved. It ran. The officer went downstairs. I heard the back door open, then footsteps across the wet grass. I stood frozen beside my daughter's bed. A few seconds later, I heard shouting, then silence. The officer returned alone. He said whoever it was had escaped through the woods. They searched the area for nearly an hour. They found nothing. But one officer discovered something behind the fence, a narrow path, almost hidden beneath the trees. It led toward the back of several houses. Someone had been using it regularly. There were cigarette butts, empty water bottles, and a flattened cardboard box beneath a large bush. Someone had been sleeping there. The police never found out who. We moved out 2 months later. I didn't want to. I couldn't afford it, but I couldn't keep living there with Emily. The house was eventually sold. I never told the new owners what happened. I know that sounds terrible, but I told myself the police had searched the property. They had found nothing. Maybe whoever had been watching us was gone. Maybe it had all been some random person passing through. I tried to believe that, until about 6 months later. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was visiting my sister. Emily was playing in the backyard. I was inside making coffee when my phone rang. It was Mr. Wilson. I hadn't spoken to him since moving. He sounded nervous. He asked if I had changed my phone number. I said no. Then he asked me something strange. "Did you ever find out who was knocking on your door?" I didn't answer. He continued, "Because someone has been knocking on the new owner's door." My stomach dropped. I asked him when. He said 3 nights earlier, at 2:13 in the morning. 3 knocks, exactly the same. I asked if the new owners had seen anyone. He said no. Then he told me something else, something I had never known. The house had been empty for almost 8 months before I bought it, and according to Mr. Wilson, the previous owner had complained about the exact same thing. 3 knocks, always at 2:13, always with nobody outside. I asked him why he had never told me. He didn't answer. I heard something in the background, a knock. I thought it was on his door. Then he whispered, "Hold on." The phone went silent. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then I heard him say something, very quietly. "He's standing outside." The call ended. I tried calling back. No answer. The police later told me Mr. Wilson had been asleep when they arrived. He said he hadn't called me. He said he didn't remember anything about the conversation. I never spoke to him again. I still think about that house sometimes, especially when I'm lying awake at night, because there was one thing I never understood. The footprints in the backyard had started at the fence. They had never crossed the fence, which meant whoever had made them had already been inside the yard. And every time I remember that, I think about the night my daughter said someone was outside, because I still don't know if she was looking at the person near the fence, or if she was talking about someone who had already gotten inside. I was 19 when this happened. I was in my second year of college studying engineering, and at the time I lived in a small apartment about 15 minutes from campus with 2 other students. We weren't close friends, we were just roommates. There was Daniel, who studied accounting, and Marcus, who was in computer science. The 3 of us had completely different schedules, which meant the apartment was usually quiet. That was one reason I liked it. I could study late without anyone bothering me. This happened during the middle of the spring semester. It was a Thursday night in March. I remember the date because we had an exam the next morning. It had been raining most of the afternoon, and by the time our evening lecture ended, the campus was almost empty. The university looked different at night. During the day, there were thousands of people walking between buildings. At night, it became a collection of dark windows and empty sidewalks. Our engineering building was one of the oldest on campus. It had been built in the 1960s and had 3 floors. The classrooms were numbered according to the floor: 101 through 118 on the first, 201 through 218 on the second, and 301 through 318 on the third. Nothing complicated. That night, our professor ended class around 9:15 p.m. I stayed behind because I had forgotten my calculator in one of the laboratories. 2 other students stayed behind with me. Their names were Jason and Malik. We were all preparing for the exam. The professor left. The 3 of us went downstairs. I found my calculator inside my backpack, which was sitting underneath one of the desks. I felt stupid. I'd spent 10 minutes looking for something I already had. Jason laughed at me. Then the three of us left the building. At least that's what I thought. We walked across the courtyard. The rain had stopped, but everything was wet. The air smelled like concrete and grass. Jason suddenly stopped. "Wait." We turned around. He was looking at the engineering building. One of the third-floor windows was lit. I looked at it. "Probably security." Jason shook his head. "No, third floor is closed." I didn't think much of it. Universities always had lights on in empty buildings. We kept walking. Then Malik realized he'd left his phone charger in the classroom. He cursed. Jason told him to forget it. Malik said he needed it, so we turned around. I remember feeling annoyed. It was already almost 9:40. I wanted to get home. The main entrance was locked. That was strange. It had been open less than 30 minutes earlier. Jason tried the handle again. Nothing. Then he pointed toward the side entrance. That door was unlocked. We went inside. The building was completely silent. The lights in the hallway were on, but they seemed dimmer than usual. Maybe it was because there was nobody around. We walked upstairs. Our classroom was on the second floor. We reached it. The door was open. Inside, everything looked exactly the way we'd left it. Chairs, desks, whiteboard. Nothing unusual. Malik grabbed his charger. Then we heard a noise above us, a chair scraping across the floor. All three of us looked up. The sound came from the third floor. Jason said, "Someone's up there." Malik shook his head. "Maybe security." We left the classroom. I suggested we go, but Jason wanted to check. He had always been the kind of person who couldn't leave anything alone. We walked toward the stairs. Halfway up, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they stabilized. Jason laughed. "Old building." We reached the third floor. The hallway was dark. Only one light was working. At the far end, we could see a classroom door. It was open. Jason walked toward it. I stayed behind. Something felt wrong. The third floor wasn't supposed to be open. There were no classes there that semester because the university was replacing the electrical system. The entire floor had been closed for months, but the classroom door was open. Jason reached it. He looked inside. Then he called us. "Guys." We walked over. There were desks inside, about 20 of them, and every single desk was facing the wall. Not the front of the classroom, the wall. I remember staring at them. Malik said, "What the hell?" Jason stepped inside. There was writing on the whiteboard, a single sentence. "Please wait for your instructor." Underneath it was a time, 10 p.m. I checked my phone, 9:52. Jason laughed. "This is probably some prank." He walked to the board. I told him to leave it. He ignored me. Then we heard footsteps. From the hallway, slow. Someone was walking toward us. We all turned. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. Jason stepped outside. "Hello?" Nothing. Then the footsteps started again. This time they came from the opposite direction, behind us, inside the classroom. We turned around. The room was empty, but one of the chairs had moved. It was now facing the door. I remember the exact feeling that went through me. My entire body became cold. Not scared. Cold. Like someone had opened a freezer beside me. Malik whispered, "Let's go." We left. We started walking toward the stairs. Then a door slammed behind us. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the second floor. We stood there breathing hard. Jason looked embarrassed. He tried to laugh. "Okay, someone's messing with us." I said, "Then where are they?" He didn't answer. We went downstairs. At the entrance, we found the security desk. There was an older security guard sitting there. I recognized him. His name was Mr. Harris. I told him we'd been on the third floor. His expression changed. "What were you doing up there?" I explained. He listened quietly. Then he asked me something. "Which classroom?" I told him. "Room 317. He stared at me. "There's no room 317. I laughed. I thought he was joking. I said, "Yes, there is." He shook his head. "Not anymore." I asked what he meant. He said the third floor classrooms had been renumbered during renovations. The old room 317 had been removed years earlier. I told him that was impossible. I'd seen the room. Jason and Malik had too. Mr. Harris stood up. He looked genuinely worried. "Show me." We followed him upstairs. The third floor was empty. The hallway looked different. There was no classroom at the end. Instead, there was a construction wall, a temporary metal barrier. We stood there. Nobody spoke. Jason walked up to it. He touched the barrier. Then he looked at us. That's not where the classroom was. Mr. Harris didn't say anything. He pulled out his keys. He opened a maintenance door beside the hallway. Behind it was a narrow service corridor. He shined his flashlight inside. There was dust everywhere. Old pipes, electrical cables, nothing else. Then I noticed something. There was a smell, old paper, and something else, something damp. Mr. Harris closed the door. He told us to leave. We did. The next morning I couldn't concentrate during the exam. I kept thinking about that classroom, the desks, the writing, the time, 10 p.m. After the exam, I asked one of my professors about room 317. He looked confused. I explained what had happened. He told me the room had existed, but it had been sealed off 12 years earlier. Apparently, there had been a serious accident during a renovation. A worker had fallen through part of the floor. He had died. The room was eventually removed during the reconstruction. I asked if the room had been used for classes before that. He said yes, but then he gave me a strange look. "Why are you asking?" I told him. He didn't laugh. He just told me not to go back upstairs. I didn't. For a while. Then 2 weeks later, something happened that made me regret ever asking questions. It was another Thursday. I was leaving campus around 8:30 p.m. I was walking toward the parking lot when I saw Jason. He was standing near the engineering building. I asked him what he was doing. He said he'd forgotten his notebook. I told him to leave it. He smiled, then he said something that made me stop. "I want to see if the room is there again." I told him he was crazy. He laughed. Then he walked inside. I watched him disappear through the side entrance. I waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then I called him. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I went inside. The side entrance was unlocked. The lights were on. I went upstairs. Second floor, third floor. The hallway was empty. I walked toward the end. The construction wall was still there. I called Jason's name. No answer. Then I heard something. A chair scraping across the floor. I froze. It came from behind the construction wall. I stepped closer. There was a gap between two metal panels. I looked through it. On the other side was a classroom. Room 317. The lights were on. The desks were arranged in rows this time, all facing forward, and someone was sitting at the very back. I couldn't see their face. I whispered Jason's name. The person didn't move. Then I heard a voice. "Class starts at 10. I stepped away. I ran downstairs. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot. Jason wasn't there. His car was still parked on campus. I called his phone again. This time someone answered. I didn't hear anything, just breathing. Then Jason's voice, very faint. "Don't come back." The call ended. I called the police. They searched the building. They found nothing. Jason was missing for almost 11 hours. He was eventually found at 7 o'clock the next morning. He was sitting in his car, parked behind the engineering building. He had no idea how he'd gotten there. His phone was dead. His notebook was gone. He refused to talk about what happened. I asked him once. Just once. He looked at me and said, "I went to class." I never asked again. Jason dropped out of university before the semester ended. I stayed. I finished my degree, but I never forgot that building. Years later, I went back to campus for an alumni event. The engineering building had been renovated. The third floor was completely different. I found myself standing in the hallway where room 317 used to be. There was now a modern laboratory there. Room 326. I asked a staff member if the building had ever had a room 317. He said no. According to him, the numbering had always been different. I smiled and walked away. Before leaving, I stopped near the elevator. I looked down the hallway one last time. There was nobody there. Then my phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. It was an old text message from Jason. The message had been sent 12 years earlier. I had never seen it before. There were only 4 words. Class starts at 10. I stood there staring at the screen. Then I checked the time. 9:52 p.m. I left the building. I didn't wait until 10. I never found out what happened to the worker who died in that old classroom. I never found out where Jason spent those 11 hours. And I never understood why, every time I remembered that night, I could still picture those desks facing the wall. But there was one detail that bothered me most. When I looked through the gap in the construction wall, I had seen someone sitting in the back of the classroom. I always assumed it had been Jason. Years later, he told me something different. He said he had never been inside room 317. Not that night, not ever. And when I asked him who he thought had been sitting in that chair, he just looked at me. Then he said something I still think about. Who said it was sitting?